Hi, I'm Amanda, and this video is for Chapter 4. First off, some things I learned are early Greek philosophers discovered the four basic elements, which are fire, earth, air, and water. Then in 1783, about 2200 years later or so, scientists discovered that water was not as simple as they thought, and that it actually shared pairs of electrons which end up forming covalent bonds. Another thing I learned is that the angle between the hydrogen atoms and water molecules is 105 degrees. Opposite ends of molecules are attached to each other, which depend on if they are polar or not. And when those two ends bond together, it forms a hydrogen bond. One thing I found interesting was overall water is an ever-changing three-dimensional network of hydrogen-bonded molecules. Another interesting thing was the molecules in any gas, liquid, or solid is always moving. Some more things I learned are temperature is a measure of the average kinetic energy of the atoms and molecules. It can be measured in 3 types of degrees, and the 2 common ones are Fahrenheit and Celsius, as you probably know, and the third one is Kelvin. Heat is a measure of total kinetic energy of the atoms and molecules in a substance. A lot of people think they're the same, but their heat and temperature are actually different. Water can take on 3 different forms of either solid, which is ice, gas, which is known as water vapor, or liquid, which is obviously water. Bonds are being created and destroyed due to temperature determines what they take on. That's for water, depending if they are water vapor or ice or not. A couple more things I found interesting are water has a continuous cycle of evaporation and precipitation, which during the evaporation, heat is being removed and forms clouds, and this heat also is a source of energy used to power Earth's weather system. Some more things I learned are the quantity of heat required to produce a unit change in temperature in the material is known as heat capacity. A measure of how difficult it is to stretch or penetrate the surface of a liquid is known as surface tension, and water is very high with surface tension. Resistance to motion or internal friction is known as viscosity. Pressure in the ocean increases with depth. Pressure has small effect on the ocean. Water density is very sensitive to temperature changes. When water is heated, energy is added, which moves the molecules and speeds them up and spreads them apart. In pure water, it has slower molecules than salt water and other waters. Salt has a greater density than water, so when salt melts in water, like in the ocean and stuff like that, the water density increases. Freshwater and saltwater both transmit energy, which can be in the form of heat, light, or sound, which I found that very interesting. And another thing I found interesting about that is heat can be transmitted in 3 ways, which are conduction, convection, and radiation. Some more things I found interesting is when light passes through water, it can be absorbed and scattered. And the process of being scattered can also, from air to water, is also called refraction or refracted. Another thing I thought interesting was the sea is a noisy place, and I kind of want to know more. I wish they told more about that a little bit, because I also thought it was interesting because you don't really think about it as noise because you never really under water for that long. And I also want to know more about sonar and how exactly it can pick up different objects between objects and noise and other things like that and everything that's going around in the ocean. 3 questions I have are, in the ocean, what determines the cutoff point for changes of surface pressure and viscosity. The second question is, out of pressure, temperature, and other things like that, what has the greatest effect on the ocean? And my last question is, when water is recycled back in as precipitation, are the molecules and forms it takes always the same every time it rains? And that is what I learned in chapter 4.